Have you ever noticed when you're in the presence of a newborn, you have a reversion experience? Whether it be your own child or someone else's, suddenly your voice goes up a couple of octaves. You start to do things you wouldn't normally do or say. You know, you giggle at them and you laugh at them. You know, newborn infants don't have much response, much reaction at all, but yet we do our best. And soon, you know, there's this response that you're not quite sure if it's a smile or just gas passing or something. And then you begin to notice that the child is actually giggling. And then you start to play that age-old game we all love to play called peekaboo. Peekaboo! Peekaboo! I see you! Peekaboo! And they laugh and they giggle and they cavort. And they have no sense of what's really going on other than they're laughing and smiling. And then, you know, they grow, and at about 18 months, you're still playing peekaboo and doing these really funny things, and the kid just sort of looks at you going, yeah, okay, I see you already. It doesn't work anymore. The famous Swiss psychologist Piaget, he talks about something called object permanence. That is, young infants, newborn infants, up to about the age of 18 months or so, have no concept that when you're no longer there, that as far as that child is concerned, you no longer exist. And he did all these interesting experiments to prove that fact. Object permanence. It's only about 2 years of age that the child begins to realize that actually you do, in fact, exist, and they will wail and cry from a mile away to get your attention. There's a tribe of indigenous people in the northern part of South Africa, and they have an interesting way of greeting one another. When they greet one another, they start off by saying, the first person would say, I see you. And then the response from the other party would be, I am here. I see you. I am here. And what their philosophy is that if, until you are seen and responded to, you do not exist. That there must be an acknowledgement of presence. That you do not exist, but only by virtue of your connection to the other person. I see you. I am here. We are one. Archbishop Desmond Tutu, in his book, No Future Without Forgiveness, he speaks of this philosophy, this African philosophy, and it's referred to as Ubuntu. Ubuntu. That is, he writes, our humanity is inextricably connected. Persons are persons through other persons. Our humanity is intimately bound. That we are not complete without the other. I am, Desmond Tutu writes, because we belong to each other. And in that spirit of Ubuntu, we have shared hospitality and compassion and love, which goes well beyond resentment and anger and envy and competitiveness. That once we begin to understand that we are complete one with the other, that those other negative responses and emotions begin to fade away. On Easter morning, Christ became fixed in history. Death was turned over. And Jesus uses the opposite kind of response by saying to us I am here, and waits for our response. In whatever way we so choose to respond, I see you. Throughout the course of Christian history, the church has interpreted and found different kinds of ways of expressing and experiencing the resurrection of Christ, of saying differently, I see you. And that is the same for you and I. Jesus says to us, I am here, and we are given the opportunity to say, we see you, but each in our own unique and special way. A way that we are called to, the way that we feel the presence of God, the way we rationally try to make sense of this miraculous event that happened so many thousands of years ago. Because from a rational point of view for you and I, this is just too beyond our capacity to comprehend. On Good Friday, the people scattered. That Jesus died a death, a kind of death that none of us could ever imagine. That his best friends were nowhere to be found. Peter, his best friend, denied him and was gone. And yet, strangers, in essence, Joseph of Arimathea, who was a very respected man in that society, asked Pilate if he could take the body down and treat it with respect. And his friend and colleague Nicodemus, who was also a person of great high standing, who truly didn't understand who this man was, but sought him out in the darkness because he didn't want to be seen associating with this individual, but something inside of him was seeking the answers to the questions he had, and it seemed that the only man, Jesus, had the answers, and he too helped Joseph of Arimathea wrap the body respectfully in linen cloths with oils and fine herbs, and placed the body of Jesus in a tomb that had never been used. And then early on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene, Jesus' devoted follower, who was deeply grieving the death of the one in which she saw her hope die, goes to the tomb to grieve and to mourn and to see her for herself so that she too could have closure. We all need that. We all need a place. We all need somewhere to go, to grieve and to mourn and to connect with those we have lost and those that we love. We need some way to transcend the boundary between life and death. We need a way to continue to live out the love that we share with those that have gone before us. And Mary gets to the tomb, and the stone is gone, and she just freaks out. She can't stay there, and she leaves. She runs back to her friends, and she talks to Peter and the one that Jesus loved, who we assume is the disciple John. And Peter and John, they take off and they run to the grave, and John beats Peter, and John gets to the grave and stops. I kind of figure why. Yet Peter, being Peter, the unpredictable agitator, he doesn't stop. And he rushes into this empty space. And as his eyes begin to adjust to the darkness, he sees a pile of linen sitting there, and off to the side is another pile that had been around the head of Jesus, and he knows that this was not a criminal act, that something far more profound had happened. And then John then decides he's going to follow in behind. So John goes into this empty tomb. And the storyteller of the Gospel of John says to us that John, the loved one of Jesus, he believed. Why? We don't know. He may have been a mystic. Something happened in him. And yet nothing happened in Peter. And the next thing we hear is both Peter and John, they take off and they go home. They tell no one. And suddenly we have a scene change. Scene 2. Mary has come back because she can't yet understand all that is going on. And she's brave enough to walk into the space, and where the linen cloths had lied, now there were angels. And the angels say to her, "Why are you weeping?" And I think Mary would want to say, "Why do you think I'm weeping? Are you kidding me? The one I have loved, the one who I followed, the one in whom my hope has been upon for these past years is dead." Then Mary turns and, assuming that it's the gardener, says in the midst of her tears, "Tell me where you've laid him. Tell me, just tell me. I want to go. I need to pay my respects. I want to bring him back. This is disrespectful." And Jesus says to her, "I am here." And Mary says, "I see you, Rabboni, teacher." Something happens in Mary. She sees him. Her hope is restored. Her new life is to begin. And she is brought back to the new relationship in the one whom she placed her trust. You're aware of the fact that there are different Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Each of the 4 Gospels present the resurrection of Jesus in a completely different and unique way. In Mark's Gospel, which is the first Gospel written about 40 years following Jesus' death, it's an abrupt end that suddenly Jesus is dead, the tomb is empty, and that is it. Later, the church added pieces because they thought, this is just too abrupt. This can't be the end. The interpretation of that gospel is different in terms of the way in which the early church saw and understood and experienced the resurrection of Christ. As John's gospel, too, offers us a different and new way of experiencing the resurrection of Christ. That our understanding of the resurrection is a personal one in which we need to make sense of it for ourselves, as John did, and as Mary did, and as Peter ultimately did, but in the moment was blind. And it is only through the work of God, through the person of the resurrected Christ, that that resurrection experience will make sense for you, to offer you a new direction and new hope and new purpose for the life that you live in a world that sometimes lacks love and hope and compassion and justice. In this resurrection moment, Jesus comes to each one of us and says, "I am here." And he seeks us as we journey through this gift of life to respond in a manner that allows us to say, "I see you." Thanks be to God. Amen.